Central, and I call this meeting of the State Board of Education's Strategic Planning Committee to order. At our last board meeting in May, Chairman Eby announced the creation of this committee and appointed the following members: myself, Mr. Larry Jensen, Mrs. Chrissy McInturf. Chairman Eby was unable to join us today, but he has crafted a memo appointing a chairman. At this time, I would ask Ms. Allie Reed from our staff to read the memo for the record.
Thank you. This is a memo addressed to the State Board of Education members and staff from Chairman Eby regarding the appointment of a committee chairman. It says, pursuant to my authority as chairman of the State Board of Education, as articulated in policy 1.200, section 5, I appoint the Honorable Ryan Holt of the 5th Congressional District as chairman of the Strategic Planning Committee of the State Board of Education. It's signed Robert Eby, member of the 3rd Congressional District, chairman.
All right, thank you. Ms. Reed, could you please call the roll to determine a quorum?
Yes. Ms. McInturf?
Here.
Mr. Holt?
Here.
Mr. Jensen? Mr. Chairman, you have 2 committee members present.
And I assume that 2 out of 3 committee members makes a quorum, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, great. So we have a quorum. As this committee is meeting virtually, we have prepared a statement of necessity. Mr. Shanahan, could you please read that statement?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan Shanahan, Associate General Counsel, State Board. The Tennessee State Board of Education Strategic Planning Committee called an electronic meeting at 9 a.m. Central Time today, Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. This meeting is called to review and discuss the State Board's master plan and to develop and approve a survey for stakeholder feedback. Due to the time-sensitive nature of the items on the committee's agenda, and due to the fact that committee members reside across the state, it was determined that a physical quorum of the members could not be assembled in Nashville for purposes of this meeting, and as such, this meeting should be conducted electronically. Notice of the meeting was posted on the State Board's website, along with the agenda and instructions for accessing the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Shanahan. Our board meetings policy, as well as TCA 8-44-108, require all votes taken during electronic meetings of the board to be taken by call of the roll. As this is a virtual meeting that's being recorded, I move that the recording serve as the minutes for this meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, thank you, Ms. McInturf. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Ms. Reed, could you please, oh, we have to call the roll. So that was not the official vote. So Ms. Reed, could you please do the roll call, please? Vote.
Yes, Ms. McInturf.
Here. Yes.
Mr. Holt.
Yes, aye.
And Mr. Jensen is not here, but he is texting me asking to add him in, so I'm going to work on that. But we do have 2 ayes.
Okay, great. So our motion passes. Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this committee is to develop and propose to the full board updates to our current master plan. The master plan contains our goals and priorities for K-12 public education in Tennessee. We currently revise the master plan every 3 years, and our committee was created to lead on updating the master plan and bringing it before the full board at our February 2026 board meeting. We had an initial conversation and review of the proposed timeline for updating the master plan at our May workshop, and our goal today is to continue that conversation. On our agenda today, we'll start with a review of what's currently in the master plan, followed by a discussion of initial feedback from State Board staff and members on potential areas to revise. Are there any questions about our agenda?
Message, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you.
At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options.
So I will take Mr. Jensen's voicemail recording as not a question about our agenda. So we'll proceed forward. Since we were meeting virtually, I asked the members and staff identify themselves before addressing the group. And for the benefit of all Tennesseans, please avoid the overuse of jargon and acronyms where possible. I'll turn it over to Ms. Brianna Summers to get us started. Ms. Summers.
Thank you, Chairman Holt. Excited to be here today. Go to the next slide. Okay, my goal for the next 15 minutes is to share context on our current master plan to see what educational progress we've made as a state and inform the discussion section of this meeting. And I'm happy to answer questions throughout. Just come off mute, shout it out, would love to hear it. Okay, so I'm sure all of you are very familiar that the State Board's mission is to ensure that rules, policies, and systems are in place so that all students are prepared for success after graduation. And we're in a unique position at the State Board of Education because state law calls us to lead a master plan for public education, as well as make public funding recommendations. We live out our mission in the master plan by setting strategic focus areas and goals for the public to examine how well rules and policies serve students. Okay, so how do we do that? Chairman Holt mentioned that every 3 years, the State Board sets these strategic focus areas based on where we want to and can, based on our authority, spend our energy for the greatest impact. We'll go through each of the strategic focus areas, but for example, the first one we'll talk about is literacy, which folks are very familiar and passionate about. For each area, we identify rigorous but achievable goals to help move that work forward around literacy or whatever the strategic goal is, or strategic focus area. Then we identify action steps that the board can take to get there. And what's great about our current master plan is that we leverage existing measures like TCAP, or the Tennessee Comprehensive Assessment Program, our state test, so that we can coordinate expectations for districts and communicate across agencies. Each fall, Allie drafts and shares a master plan report to monitor progress on our goals to share with the public and members. And much of our work is aligned with the master plan. So for example, members are probably very familiar with our cover items, with the cover sheets, and at the bottom of each one, it says the connection to the master plan. And we always welcome thoughts and feedback on how to further integrate our work with the master plan. Okay, so next we'll talk about literacy as promised. So the strategic focus area is literacy, and then the bullet points beneath that in blue are our goals. We have 2 goals for literacy. One is around 3rd grade ELA TCAP, the state test I just mentioned, and one is around 8th grade. And we want to increase proficiency both for all students and for specific student groups. And then if you look at our 2024 master plan report, you'll see, the various actions that board members took throughout the year to advance that goal, including Chairman Holt. Okay, so how are we doing on those 2 goals? First, I will mention hot off the press. This is brand new data from the Department of Education for 2025. You will hear more from the department on this data at the August workshop, but I'm happy to get those questions started. I will say our latest master plan goals were based on 2024 data or the most recent available data, whatever we had. But this presentation specifically highlights the latest available data from whatever we could find to inform your decision making in this meeting. Okay, so just to orient you to the graph, first, the colors along the bottom are our student groups that I mentioned. All students, economically disadvantaged, English learners, and students with disabilities. The percentages across, top to bottom, that's the percent proficient, or AKA pass the TCAP, right? You either pass it or you don't. And then the years, also along the bottom, are when the TCAP was administered. So for example, I mentioned we have hot off the press data. That's that last set of data on the right, 2025. And we're really excited. You might have seen in press releases and all sorts of things that almost all student groups improved on the 3rd grade ELA TCAP over 3 years. That's a huge deal. But to be fully transparent in the spirit of strategic planning, our growth was slower than the master plan goals. So, too long didn't read. We're improving, but maybe not at the speed we want to. Okay, this is the same graph for all intents and purposes, except now we've moved to 8th grade ELA. We just did 3rd grade. This is 8th grade. It's a similar story. Almost all groups grew over 3 years, but the growth on proficiency was a little slower than we intended. But cannot, be remiss to not mention, the growth that we do have is thanks to all the hard work of state board members, students, teachers, and districts. Okay. Our next strategic focus area is post-secondary and career, and we have 2 goals here. One is the Ready Graduate Indicator, and it sounds scary and complicated, but really it just measures preparedness based on student interest. So, for example, a student could take 4 EPSOs, like an AP class, and they could be a Ready Graduate. And it is a yes, no, either yes, you are a Ready Graduate, or no, you're not. And there's different, what I like about the Ready Graduate measure is there's different pathways that we often talk about. So you could also do an industry certification or industry credential, AP. There's lots of different options. So essentially the goal is to increase the Ready Graduate Indicator both overall and similarly by student group. The second goal is around increasing post-secondary enrollment. And we set that goal because if we were to meet it, it would return Tennessee to pre-pandemic enrollment, right? So our Tennessee high school students graduating from high school and enrolling in some sort of post-secondary opportunity. And it is a broad definition that includes multiple pathways again. And the reason why we chose this numerical number was to align with Tennessee Higher Education Commission and their goals, knowing that they're the experts in this work. Okay, so that first goal I mentioned is around Ready Graduate Indicator. Are high school graduates ready for post-secondary? Orient you to the graph again. So it's the same years as last time. It's the same student groups. Really the only thing that's changed are the percentages. So instead of, did you pass the TCAP or not, it's were you identified as a Ready Graduate or not? And we are excited that high school graduates post-secondary readiness improved across all student groups over 3 years. It's a huge deal. But we didn't meet our 2024 English learner or students with disabilities goal. So that green and yellow did not necessarily meet our goal, but we did meet our goal for all students in red and economically disadvantaged students in blue. So again, we're making progress, particularly in some groups, but of course, did not meet every single one of our sub-bullet goals. Okay, I mentioned post-secondary enrollment. Are Tennessee high school graduates enrolling into something after they graduate? So this graph, that's the percentage. Did they enroll after graduating? And then the years, it's a little confusing. So think of it as, if you have kids, like the class of blank. So this most recent data that we have, that's the class of 2023 who graduated high school. Were they enrolling in post-secondary? And again, we have some positive upward trajectory data. Student enrollment in post-secondary education continues to recover post-pandemic. You'll see that, big drop at 2020 that you see in a lot of charts that we show you from time to time. But, every year we've steadily improved since 2021. We did miss our 2024 goal by 0.6 percentage points, which is really, really small. That's less than 1% percentage point. So we're very, very close. And we're excited that THEC will share the most recent data class of 2024 at our August workshop. Okay, any questions so far on what I've said? Okay, feel free to jump in. Our next goal is around teachers and leaders. And there's 2 goals here. One is around new teacher retention, right? Are we, effectively onboarding folks into the educating profession, and do they want to stay in a Tennessee public school? 2 is transitioning teachers who are not fully licensed, they're teaching on a permit, it might not be their full area of expertise yet. Can we transition them to a full professional license? Okay, so our most recent data shows that the percentage of newly licensed teachers who remain in a Tennessee public school for at least 3 years increased last year. And that's really great. We're excited. This data is also hot off the press. Thank you, Erica. I will say that our master plan report was based on that 2023 number. So we didn't necessarily meet our goal. We actually saw that retention go down between 2022 and 2023, but this new recovery is promising and hopefully will inform your decision making on the strategic plan. Okay, so I mentioned, permitted teachers transitioning to a full license. The school years along the bottom, it's a little confusing. You're like, why are those dates so old? 2 reasons. One is because this is measuring across 3 years, right? So that most recent data, 2020, 2021, and these are school years, of course, we'd need to look at 2023 at the very least to see, did they stay? And I will say this does count, movers, right? If you change, from the elementary school on one side of town to the other one, you still count here. So it is intentionally lagged to cover those 3 years. And I will say we should get updated data by September. But overall, less than half of educators teaching on a permit obtained a full and valid license within 3 years. And this is almost 20 percentage points below our goal at 65%. So a lot of growth and lessons learned here. I will say we did set this goal at about the same time that the limited license was introduced. And this added uncertainty about what kind of goal we could even set that would be reasonable. So if the committee wants to move forward with a similar goal, we'd have better data to set a rigorous and achievable goal going forward.
Ms. Summers, I have a question about this slide here. Do we know what is happening to these educators who are teaching on a permit, the 55% who aren't receiving a license, how long they continue to teach, if we have any feedback from them on obstacles in getting a license, any information about what's happening with that 55% group?
Yeah, definitely open it up to other state board staff members. One thing I can speak to, sometimes licensure assessments are a barrier. And I will say Michael Gerline and the licensure review committee are looking into different flexibilities because, while you might not be successful on test A, if test B is equally rigorous and measures the same thing, are we giving opportunities for educators to pass? But yes, we do get emails fairly often about educators and even principals who will say, this is a phenomenal educator, we're really struggling to pass that professional assessment. And I will say the licensure review committee also and the State Board of Education is in the process of moving away from EdTPA, the pedagogical assessment, due to some of the identified unnecessary barriers and costs for candidates. So I'm really curious to see for this data what it looks like in a post EdTPA world.
I'd also like to add, this is Erica Light, the Director of Research for the State Board, and I would like to add that, as Brianna mentioned, the limited license is a new pathway for educators to go from a permit to a full license. And during the time period that was covered by this data, there hadn't really been enough time yet for people to use that pathway. People were just starting to enter that pathway. So we may see in the future, if people are utilizing that pathway to go from a permit to a full license, that may cause this number to increase.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Erica.
I have one more question. Would these educators get picked up on, I should know the answer to this, I should qualify, on the Terra survey? Are they in that pool? Erica, do you know that? Or Brianna?
I think they would be in the pool because they are staffed in a school and they have a license number assigned to them. They don't actually have a license, but they have an identification number assigned to them in the same way that a licensed educator has. So I think they would still be, or have the opportunity to complete the educator survey. I just don't know if the educator survey would capture that they were teaching on a permit. We would have to ask Tara about that.
That's, I think, Amy Owen will be starting there in less than a month, and it might be a good question for her, because I do think it'd be interesting with the limited license pathway now, and just, the idea that this is such a right pool of candidates to stay in the classroom for a long time if they can get their full licensure, just to track and understand better what's happening with these these educators? Seems like that might be a way we could think about getting more information.
That's a great point, Sarah. Going straight to the source on their thoughts and experiences, and it's such a rich data source that not all states have.
I have another quick question. What percentage of educators roughly are teaching on a permit in the state of Tennessee?
That is a great question. We should be getting a report in November of this year from the Department of Education with the most recent data, but I'd be happy to pull the latest report that we currently have and send it to you.
And just for today's purposes, and that's helpful, thank you. For today's purposes, I mean, do we have any sort of ballpark estimate? Is this going to be a small percentage? Or are we talking like in the 5 to 10%, do we think, or a much larger percentage, if anybody has any kind of ballpark?
Yes, I believe overall it's between 5 and 10%, but in some schools it is, of course, lower than that. And then in some schools it is unfortunately higher than that as well. But I think the general range is in the 5 to 10%.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because I hear Dr. Morrison's point about this being a group of candidates who could be, good to focus on for trying to move them into becoming fully licensed teachers. But also, if it's a relatively small percentage of all the educators in the state, then how much should we be focused for strategic planning on this group, as opposed to just, not to jump ahead of us, but just, retaining and recruiting effective teachers, period. Kind of looking at the whole population instead of this subset of teachers on a permit. So just something to put a pin in.
I think those are great ideas. I think that is the
And
exact
that's why I would
focus.
wonder, to Ryan's or Mr. Holt's question, how many did, because I do think Tara might be able to tell us that if they're tracking it. I do remember in their survey data, they were saying we see more non-traditional candidates. I don't know if they're considering this part of that pool, but I think it's a great question. We need to understand the scope of the population.
Thank you all.
Of course, I appreciate the question. And I will pull the report once I pass it back off to Allie and put it in the chat so y'all have it right in front of you as you're discussing. Okay, our last strategic focus area is engagement and accountability. And this goal is all around transparency, accountability, and continuously staying up to date with law changes and supporting students. And I know when I came to the state board, this was something I was really impressed that, both members and staff really hold ourselves to a high expectation here. Okay, so excited that we were able to meet this goal. And there's, lots of different pieces within it, but one is our item review cycle. We state board staff in partnership with the Textbook Commission and the Department of Education really work to prepare those items in a collaborative and iterative format before they come to you for discussion. For example, our textbook waiver rule that was on final reading in May 2025 was based on district feedback. They actually sort of alerted us to it, and it was in conversation with the Department of Education. We are currently reviewing recently passed laws to determine any rule and policy changes, and we complete that every summer alongside the department. Perhaps what I'm most excited about is we recently added legislatively required reports to the report section of every agenda. It's fairly new, and a couple goals there, both to keep members in the loop of the latest and greatest data hot off the press, and to promote stakeholder transparency. There's so many reports flying around, having it all in one consolidated place and knowing what to expect. So those are all of my slides. I'm happy to answer any questions now, but if not, I will pass it to Allie.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. Are there any questions for Ms. Summers on her presentation just now? All right. I'll ask that Ms. Reed lead us through a discussion of initial input from staff and members and our stakeholder survey. Ms. Reed.
Thank you so much. All right, we are moving into discussion of a stakeholder survey and just general getting some feedback from you all on where we're headed. So thank you, Brianna, for sharing where we have been the last 3 years, that most recent data that we have, and thinking about what are our current goals. We did gather input from both staff and from you all recently through a survey. And so I will be sharing those results with you today and going through again each of the 4 strategic focus areas to discuss within those the feedback that we received and any additional ideas that you all have. So this is really an initial conversation to get us going, start thinking about where we're headed here, and then we'll wrap up with a discussion on a wider stakeholder survey that we'll be issuing in August. So as we're thinking about updating the master plan, I have a few key questions that I want you to keep in your mind. And these are similar to ones that you heard from myself and Paolo Di Maria from NASB at our May workshop when we were kind of kicking off this conversation. These are similar questions that we posed then too. So 1, where should we focus our collective efforts? And I think, Mr. Holt, you were just alluding to that, and even thinking about our current goals that we have set. Is this really the biggest bang for our buck, if you will? What will afford us the highest leverage of our time and energy? So again, just restating that question a different way. And in what ways are we promoting that coherence and continuous improvement at the state and local levels? And so that's an additional push that we heard as a result of that TNCP presentation that everyone really resonated with in May as well. So I'm bringing that question back around too. Keeping in mind that what our role is with the State Board of Education, we are the rule and policy making body. And so while we do not have direct influence of what's happening exactly in the classroom, we are not in the classroom every single day or at a school every single day. We are developing those rules and policies that have direct influence on what happens. And so we're thinking about, kind of more of a indirect or influence. What are our rules and policies related to that can influence the outcomes that we're tracking? So we're thinking about setting goals around things that we have an influence over, as opposed to directly being part of at the school level. The first question that we included in the member survey that you all just recently participated in was just identifying these top 3 issues for K-12 public education. And this was really a ranking of our current goals that we have in the master plan and adding in a few additional. And so on this slide, you can see how members ranked their issues. And so green represents those who selected the issue as their first choice, as the top issue to consider, blue as second, gray as third. And just to make this a little easier to read, I'll note that we had 7 members identifying literacy as the first choice. The top second choice was numeracy, and then the top third choice was retaining effective educators, with recruitment of effective leaders close behind. So we're going to dig into each of the 4 strategic areas and discuss actually what was some feedback that we've received from staff, feedback we received from members, and open it up to you all to just have a wider conversation about it. So starting back with literacy, Brianna did a great job giving you this overview and where we're at. You just saw that recent TCAP data, which is great news. And a reminder of how we set these goals. These are really thinking about annual goals that are incremental, ones that we're tracking based on these data points that we have access to through TCAP, specifically for literacy. And we were using, again, that annual measurable objective calculation that the Department of Education has in determining what is the appropriate increase, a measurable and achievable, but also rigorous increase that we would like to see annually. So looking at the feedback that we've received, and then again, we'll open it up to discussion from you all. On the left-hand side, you see some considerations, feedback from staff, the right-hand side, feedback from members. So starting with staff, some things that we heard, and actually we heard nearly identical feedback from members, is thinking about this literacy goal as expanding. And something that staff mentioned could be literacy and numeracy, or expanding even greater to academics. When we compare that to what we are hearing from you all so far, it was really identifying literacy and numeracy. Another piece of feedback that we heard from staff was setting goals by grade bands as appropriate. Our current goals are bucketed in focusing on 3rd and 8th grade, and so considering if this is a possibility or an option that we want to pursue of doing grade band goals instead. And then ensuring that the language is student focused. In terms of feedback from members, most members wanted to keep these two goals as written, with 2 members selecting to remove or revise. And that really had to do with adding in numeracy and then thinking about what is continuing to push on what is within our locus of control. Additional specific feedback that we heard from you all is, again, bringing in those numeracy goals, adding actions related to early interventions and ongoing teacher supports, and ensuring we have the right improvement measures or metrics. So I want to pause here and open it up to you all to discuss initial thoughts or adding on to what you shared in your survey, questions, however we want to discuss it.
So when we're looking at changing some of our goals, I just wanted to make sure that we are, like, I know you said indirectly and that we influence a lot of things, but just making sure that we have the like specific goals that are related to what we do and that we can actually make a change if they don't reach the goal, right? So like what are some things that we can do that would actually influence the outcomes? I would like to have some more goals that we would actually have more influence over.
Does anyone else have any comments? And my understanding, this is open for discussion with anyone. Is that right?
Yes,
Or
not
so-
limited to committee members, all
Right.
members on the call, absolutely.
I'll say that I like the idea of setting the goals by grade bands because it captures a larger number of students. I mean, we focus so much on 3rd grade ELA, and there are reasons for that we all know. But we have the data for other grades as well. And if, 4th or 5th or 6th or other grade ELA, is really improving favorably, then that's good for us to note that. And if it's not, then it's good for us to note that, I think, just as it is with 3rd grade or 8th grade. We don't have TCAP, at least for K through 2. So was there an alternative that folks were thinking of for K through 2? Like universal reading screeners or doing something along those lines?
We talked about universal reading screeners and setting a goal around that 3 years ago when we first were refreshing the master plan. I think what's challenging there is that districts have options in terms of the screeners that they're using. And it just seemed at the time that there wasn't going to be a clear data point to compare across districts to really consider, or schools to really consider, the outcomes that we're seeing. So I think there was some challenges in getting a data point that we could use to actually measure how successful we were in moving that.
I think there's also a risk of the more goals you have and the more metrics you're using to see if you're hitting them, then the less focus that you may have on each of those goals. So if we're concerned that universal reading screeners may be not something that we can adopt in a clear and coherent way, I wonder if a intermediate step would be at least to expand to all the grades for which we have TCAP results instead of just a couple of grades.
I think that's a great point. What are reactions to adding numeracy goals in here? Or as staff was thinking, even do we want to expand to academics more broadly, or even just making it literacy and numeracy, separating it out? What are our reactions to those comments?
I mean, we can track numeracy just as easy as we can literacy. I don't think it would be that big of a deal to add numeracy. It just give you more data. Another thought when we're looking at tracking TCAP scores, I mean, there's legislation that might happen in the next year that would change what grades are assessed. So we may have to think about that when we're putting in goals for different grade levels as well. But we won't know that for another year. So if they change it all.
That's a good point.
I mean, the fact that it appears that both members and staff independently arrived at the idea that we should include numeracy seems to suggest to me that would be a fruitful place for us to continue to consider expanding on the goals in our strategic plan.
Seems telling. Yes. Sorry, I don't know why my screen just dropped the slides. You can see it again.
We can. I
Okay.
can.
Great. Any other thoughts, additional comments, points anyone wants to make regarding literacy or even the idea of expanding to literacy and numeracy? Okay. We'll move into our second strategic focus area. Currently, it is post-secondary and career. And again, the two data points that we set goals around was the readiness for post-secondary and careers, and thinking about the readiness indicator that we have data points on. And of course, as Brianna mentioned earlier, that includes a variety of different pathway options to demonstrate readiness for post-secondary and career. And then the second goal focused on post-secondary enrollment. And again, that is broadened. That's not only enrolling in a four-year university, that is also considering our TCAT, different technical education. So it is a broader consideration here, not only limited to going to a four-year university. So some feedback that we heard again from staff and members from staff is thinking about setting a goal and actions related to early graduation or tracking data by student subgroups. Also establishing a goal and actions related to the implementation of the high school and beyond plans, and establishing a goal focused on completion of post-secondary credits and or credentials in high school. And then from members, again, we saw most members opting or noting that they did want to keep the two goals as written, with two members saying that we should consider removing or revising. And this had to do with clarifying that post-secondary includes multiple pathways, a broad definition. And Mr. Jensen, I think that was your comment. So if you're able to come off of mute, would love for you to talk a little bit about that too. And then also in a reoccurring comment of just making sure that these goals are within our locus of control. So Mr. Jensen, can you hear us? If you can hear us, we can't hear you. I know Josh is working on helping with him, so I'll let them keep working together. But some feedback that we received specifically from members around this, this focus area was adding a goal or actions regarding the development of individualized plans. So I think that is referring back to those high school and beyond plans. Ensuring we have the right improvement metrics or measures. Again, we see that as a repeating theme to keep in mind. And then balancing opportunities with expectations that might not suit all students. So this is something that Mr. Mollenhauer flagged, and he specifically named that we want to do our best to provide opportunities for post-secondary education, but also be careful about not pushing people into it. And so thinking about that balance of like what might be best for one student isn't necessarily best for all students. And so continued push for higher metrics could inevitably do a disservice to some students. So finding that balance there of not necessarily saying 100% of students will do X, Y, or Z thing if it may not be what's best for all students. So I'll open it up again to discuss, and just reactions to this feedback, anything additional to add on or emphasize?
Thank you, Ms. Reed. Are there any questions or comments on this category? I have a question about how it's measured, and I may just have overlooked that. So when we're talking about it's a number output that our current goal is the percentage of all students demonstrating readiness for post-secondary and careers after high school. How do we calculate that?
So that's that readiness indicator that the department scores. And let me go back to my notes specifically to tell you what's included. So the Ready Grad indicator, students would receive points for a regular or alternative diploma and a additional point for scoring 21 or higher on the ACT or an equivalent on the SAT, completing for early post-secondary opportunities or completing 2 early post-secondary opportunities and earning an industry credential, or completing 2 early post-secondary opportunities and a score of the military readiness on the ASVAB assessment. So there's a few different ways that you can earn those points. And that's what's ultimately being calculated in the Ready Grad indicator.
And this is not just ready to enroll in a 2 or 4 year college, but ready to be productive if this graduate were to go straight into the workforce. Is that?
Yep, that's what it's designed to include, with that like military readiness assessment, with those industry credential earnings and the ACT or SAT equivalent on top of the graduation diploma.
How else is the Ready Grad indicator used in policy making at the state? Is this something that other agencies are using for some purposes that we know of?
It's a good question. I'm not sure, but I'm sure there's some staff members on here that could chime in on that one.
Yes, thanks for the question, Mr. Holt. The Ready Grad indicator is used in Tennessee's Federal Accountability Plan under ESSA. It is different from the readiness indicator that is used for school letter grades. They have some overlap in what's included, but they're not exactly the same.
Yes, thanks for clarifying, Erica.
Mr. Chairman, might also be good to point out here that the State Board of Education actually plays a very pivotal role as far as the early post-secondary opportunities for the state. When some of these programs were created early in the 20-teens, there was also created a consortium that provides some oversight for some of these early post-secondary opportunities over things like dual credit and dual enrollment and just some of the other EPSO opportunities. And through some of the work that we've done, the state is transitioning away from the dual credit, which had, on its best day, maybe a 6% completion rate in terms of the awarding of college credits, over to the extremely successful dual enrollment. While we don't necessarily see those meetings that take place, and it's not terribly high profile, yet it is something that we're very much engaged in, especially also with the cross work that Sarah and I are able to do with the Higher Education Commission. So this is an area where the board is, very active, but it's just not got a spotlight on.
All right, thank you, Mr. James. I mean, it occurs to me that, this goal as it is written, that all students are prepared for success in high school, post-secondary, and career, is sort of the ballgame. Like this is everything, right? Like all of our goals roll up into, we want students to be able to read, we want them to be able to do math, we want to have great teachers, we want to have great leaders. All of these are in service of, because we want students to be successful, not just going to college, but broadly speaking, for career and life. if you were to broaden it even more. So I guess what I'm getting at is I would think that everybody would agree that that's a very important goal. And so then it's a matter of like how good of a fit is this ready grad indicator for evaluating whether we are, being successful as a state in moving students, more students toward being prepared for success in that way. And are there, is there a consensus that this is the best indicator, that the ready grad for that purpose? Are there any others that we might want to be looking at for it?
I'm in, if it's all right. Michael Dorline, Deputy Executive Director of Policy and Research with the State Board. I think that's a really good question, and I've been thinking a bit about intentionality of what students are, courses that students are taking, dual enrollment courses. We are involved in a grant program with the Tennessee Higher Education Commission that focuses on more intentional dual enrollment course taking so that students aren't doing what they call random acts of dual enrollment. They're not just simply taking college courses to take college courses, but they're taking those that are intentionally aligned to their plans moving forward. Difficult data to capture, but may be really powerful if we could. And then the other piece I'd say is lots of conversations happening around credentials of value. So similarly, not just, necessarily credit for any credentials, but credit for credentials that have some promise in the future for wage earning and, future growth potential. So again, I think those could get a little bit more narrow focused and could be a little more challenging to capture, but they might kind of put us in a better place as far as outcomes go.
This is Larry Jensen. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
So I'm driving, so in and out, and hopefully I'll be here for a while. I do struggle a bit. Well, let me ask a high-level question. The AI is in a rapid transformation of a lot of things, including, as I think you'll all agree, how we're educating kids. I would, and not for this moment, but I would really appreciate maybe a workshop or something. How are you viewing that? How's the department viewing the transition to that type of learning that's got, I mean, we don't even know where it's going, but my point is we're doing a master plan and we're thinking about the future, but what are we doing to incorporate that into it? I don't need an answer right now. It's more of a just raising it as an issue. And then, for example, I'll tell you, the University of Memphis is starting this fall, I think, a Polytechnic Institute inside of the engineering department. And the intent of that is to create a pathway to certificates, but also to a BS degree. And they're really working very diligently to put that together. And I just think, there's so much transition going on that we're doing a master plan for 5 years. Is that shift? And I think I'm hearing you, yes, but I just want to get a better feel for that. And not today, but perhaps at workshop, or I'd really appreciate some insight into who's thinking about AI and how it's going to impact education over the next 12 months, 36 months, whatever the time frame is.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. And I'll second that. I think it would be really helpful to have a focused discussion on AI and all of the different implications. What I think it does fit well with master planning, for this aspect of it, of, what skills do we anticipate are going to be the most in demand, not just right now, but to the extent we can, 3-5 years out from now, taking into account what the impact of AI could be. And then, how is AI being used in schools. A group of us went to a superintendent study council where there was a good presentation. I was very impressed with the number of teachers who were using AI for lesson planning. But also, how are we teaching students to use or not use it? How are we checking to see whether students are using it when they should or shouldn't be, and how schools can check on that? There's such a broad range of issues, many of which don't really fall into the purview of the state board, but I'm sure some of which do. And I think having some focused discussion on that could be really helpful, since it's, I think a lot of people predict that.
My point
Yeah.
would be that we're in a master planning, and that just seems like that's got to be in that incorporated in that thinking. The other thing, there's a shift, I think, going on. I'm in a graduate level course in a language, and they're not requiring us to learn declensions and all that. It's very interesting, that shift. I just think the landscape is changing rapidly, and we do a master plan, and that just seems to, with all the information online, et cetera, how we think about that, even down to the point of what's acceptable use of AI in a high school English class. And I'm not trying to get all that nailed down today. That's not my point. My point is that the landscape is shifting quickly, and the Department of Education, who's thinking about that is my question, because it impacts our kids all over each of our districts.
I can jump in briefly because I know this will take us down a rabbit hole, but it is a good rabbit hole to be in, because I agree this is, like a T-bone that's about to hit or has already hit. Society and education is certainly already being impacted. I've been part of a working group over the last 18 months that SCORE has helped convene, and it's brought different stakeholders together, including the Department of Education, but also people in workforce, higher ed, K-12. It's been really interesting, and they've done a great job bringing in national experts, state leaders, like district leaders, who are really kind of forward thinking in how AI can support, particularly reducing time burdens on educators. I think there is some growing consensus that while there's a lot to figure out in terms of the student facing applications and some of the privacy concerns and other, notable questions that still remain, there are a lot of things that educators can be doing to help, free up their time for more value add interactions with students and just kind of freeing them up. So one small thing we could do is, there was a joint session that I participated in with TOS and SCORE back in June, and that's recorded. We could send that out again to members as kind of a starting place. They brought together a few district leaders and just had some good background information about AI and how things are coming. But Amanda Glover at SCORE has really become an expert in AI and education, and I think we can talk offline about workshop presentation or other ways to get this in front of the board. And then I think it is a really, important question to be asking as we're talking about master plan, and, what implications does the board have, or what implications for us are there, rolled up in all of the things that are changing related to AI? What are the policy connections? That's something I continue to try to ask myself. I mean, student standards, teacher standards need to reflect that. There's a lot there to try to unpack. And so maybe, Allie, we just try to think about if there's a way through the master plan to have some questions that undergird some of these issues, or I'm not sure what the right way to incorporate it will be, but maybe for now we kind of put it as a question that kind of lives aside of these goals and figure out how we want to speak to it as part of the master plan.
Yeah, I think it's a great flag, and just immediately am thinking about building in some action steps that push us to bring these conversations forward, and to be thinking about, is there a space for a policy or just guidance support? What does that look like in our role at the state board? But as we're about to get into next, to what you just shared, Dr. Morrison, in terms of thinking about how teachers are using it, that could very well impact the teacher retention rate and leader retention rate. If we're thinking about how they're using it effectively to cut down on time, I mean, we know that's a big part of what drives teachers out of the profession. So I think that there's definitely some considerations that we can build in at a minimum into our action steps to really learn more and then think about what impacts we can have there and move forward from that point. But it is absolutely being discussed, and I think we should bring that forward a bit more in our conversations too.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next part, I just want to emphasize again, I think that to Mr. Jensen's point, that on this aspect of post-secondary and career readiness, that it would be great if we can try not to be reactive and have goals that are kind of for the past 10, 15 years, but try to be visionary, bring in expertise to the extent that we can. And although no one knows where this is all headed, if we can at least try to bring in expertise, so we're trying to create, steer students towards the post-secondary options that are most likely to exist, 3, 5, 10 years from now. But that would be a good thing for us to strive for. So.
Thank you. Okay, I think we'll move into teachers and leaders unless there's any final thoughts here. Okay. Our third strategic focus area is that focus on teachers and leaders and having qualified and effective educators in our schools. There are 2 specific goals that we have currently, one related to newly licensed teachers remaining in our public schools, as well as moving teachers from a permit to a valid and full practitioner professional license within 3 years. And as you all were already discussing earlier in this meeting, you're really thinking about what is going to get us, what is the biggest or highest lever that we can pull for this? Are we setting goals that's really impacting the greatest number of educators? Really important point to keep in mind as we're talking about the feedback that we've received so far. So looking at considerations from staff, some notes that staff shared was to think about adding an action that requires the review of best practices or metrics from the report card and educator survey. Adding an action that revisits the effectiveness of teacher evaluations and differentiated compensation policies for districts, and adding an action that requires an investigation into the factors that impact why a permit holder would not move to a permanent license, which you all are already talking about without having reviewed this slide necessarily. So great, we're very much aligned in how we're thinking about this. Some feedback that we heard from members, this one was a little more mixed in terms of wanting to keep it as written or remove or replace. However, I will say most of the feedback was really specific about that 65% measure of moving from a permit to a license goal. So most members are really focused on that goal in particular and thinking about whether or not we want to keep or remove it. So some of the specific notes that I saw in the survey was just unclear why we set that 65% goal as an overall goal for 3 years as opposed to annual incremental goals for it. And then also changing, just a push to even, as you all were sharing earlier, changing from a focus on permit to licensure to really just retaining effective educators and making that more of the focus. And some suggestions in terms of increasing that percentage again. Additional notes from members within the survey was increasing the goal or establishing that annual increments, which I mentioned. Actually, I think I just highlighted all of those. So I don't need to read it out, but I'll open it up to the group again to discuss reactions, additional comments on this feedback or the topic more broadly about educators and leaders and retention and recruitment.
Can you expand on whoever had the feedback for differentiated compensation policies, what you're thinking about that?
I don't remember who from staff shared that, but I think the idea here is really understanding how districts are using those differentiated compensation policies. We know that they have the option. We have some anecdotal evidence of how it's being used, but I think really revisiting it, or just kind of more formalizing an understanding of how districts are using that for us to consider if that is really playing a role in retaining effective educators.
Okay, I would be against having that in our plan just because I don't really see the data that has an impact on, you know, apples and oranges. I don't know. That's just my own opinion.
One thing to note, there was some legislation, or I guess Nathan can correct me, maybe it wasn't legislation, but there is going to be a teacher evaluation study essentially that came out of last session that will maybe give us some better information about where we need to go as a state with the way we think about evaluating and rewarding educators. So maybe it's more about kind of following that information and that report and seeing if there's anything naturally that comes out of that for the board to take up in terms of the teacher leader evaluation compensation space. And I agree, Chrissy, they're not necessarily related, but sometimes they are in terms of how districts are thinking about trying to target hard to staff areas, teacher leaders, like the compensation policies that align with the evaluation results sometimes. So maybe it's just, again, trying to make sure that we're studying that information as it comes together around kind of the state of play, since that's not been something that's really been in the forefront the last few years for the state.
Nathan James, Deputy Executive Director, Legislative External Affairs. There was also legislation about merit pay that passed this year, but it so largely mirrored what's already on the books in terms of merit of differentiated compensation that it'll be interesting to see, you know, what changes come as a result of it.
I just see the multiple factors that go into play there. And I know that, I mean, I'm definitely in an area that you can change your test scores based on sound teaching practices and science-based instruction. But, you know, I don't know. I feel like we need to do more research and look at that, like you said, and look at what the legislation comes, you know, what comes down the pike there before we have that in our plan.
Allie, could you go back to the prior slide just on what the current goals are, please? So the first one, the percentage of newly licensed teachers who remain teaching for at least 3 years will increase by 0.5 points annually. Do we have data that we can use to determine as that number goes up or down, what's causing it? Like why we are retaining more licensed teachers or are not? Because it seems like that's something, looking through the member, you know, rankings of goals that you showed earlier, that retaining effective teachers is, you know, one of the top three in terms of member feedback for what our goals should be. And that appears to me to be a good measurement of that. You know, the increasing the percentage of licensed teachers who remain teaching, I guess you could have some measurement of whether they're effectiveness built into it. That could be more difficult, but I guess what I'm not sure on is if that number is moving up or down, do we have data so that we could then figure out, okay, well, what's working or not working, so that we could tailor our board's work to that?
Yeah, I think the feedback we saw from staff that I just mentioned a moment ago speaks to that exactly, of really digging in a bit more. I think that the general feedback from staff wasn't about changing these metrics, but was really understanding more of what's driving them. So one of the things that staff was thinking about with regard to that goal in particular was looking at a deeper review of best practices or metrics from the report card and really trying to dig in further. And when I say report card, I'm referring to the educator prep report card that the state board produces, as well as the educator survey, and really relying on the measures and metrics and the data that we're receiving from those data points to tell us and provide some more insight. And so I think this action lives within that goal of really focusing on better understanding this data point, which could be a year, 2 years, it could be the full 3 years. We're really focusing in on that to get a better sample size. But I think that is exactly the feedback that we heard from staff as well. And Erica, if you want to, is there anything else that you want to add on there?
Sure. So in the educator preparation report card data, we unfortunately don't have information about why people are leaving, although we do have the ability to track the evaluation data of people who are leaving versus staying. So we could look, for example, to see if highly effective educators are disproportionately staying or leaving, as opposed to educators who are maybe not performing as well on their evaluations, because that could potentially speak to strategic retention. As for the Tennessee Educator Survey, which Ali mentioned, it does have a question about people's intentions to stay in the teaching profession. And one of the most common reasons given for not wanting to stay is leadership. So that's an area where we could potentially look into what leadership qualities in particular are pushing teachers to either remain in the profession or to leave.
I've been reading a book on leadership, and they said that I'll have to fact check it, but a collaborative culture makes teachers stay even if they're not getting paid. Even if pay is a lot larger in another district, they'll stay if they feel like they have a shared responsibility in their own voice. So I feel like we need to have, like you said, more training for leadership that allows the teachers and the educators and the staff to actually have a voice in what's happening in the school. That's a big indicator.
Yeah.
I'll just-
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brianna.
Oh, I was just going to say, Brianna Summers, Director of Policy and Academics. Chrissy, the fact check is here. I was opening the exact report Erica was talking about, and we can put it in the chat from TARA, the Tennessee Education Research Alliance. And their key finding was early career teachers most often cited school culture and encouragement from administrators as what drove their retention decisions for the next school year.
And I'll just add to that, just thinking about the locus of control of the board, you all really hold the key to educator preparation, leader preparation, program approval. And we have really strong and broad in scope rules and policies related to those standards and expectations for those programs. So if you all wanted to focus more heavily on the preparation or the perception that candidates have of their preparation on the front end, you could potentially do that. I think on the back end, the school climate, the leadership standards, those sorts of things that we're talking about now too. We've got the Tennessee Instructional Leadership Standards, which is kind of fascinating because we have leadership standards approved by the board, but we don't have teacher or instructional standards approved by the board for educators. I always found that interesting. But my point being, there's another lever there to emphasize school culture and climate. And then lastly, I would say in DNF hearings, as you start to see schools that are coming before you, districts that are struggling with keeping teachers, this is another point I think that can be emphasized there.
Absolutely. Marcia, I saw you waving. Did you want to?
I
share?
don't know. I can't get it where y'all can hear me.
We can hear you now.
Okay. I wanted to mention on a couple different things on what Chrissy had said as far as not putting in about the incentives. What happens with teachers is when you have certain incentives which are considered pay increases, it has a tendency for teachers to not really focus on the individual students, but yet on the overall test results, and the collaboration that should be happening within the classroom kind of dwindles because it's kind of like, oh, this is my technique and I want to get this incentive, where the goal with retaining teachers is the collaboration, and it is I'm a great teacher, so I want to mentor those that are not as proficient in my content area as someone else. So it's kind of like twofold. You want incentives for the group or for teachers that are hard to find. Let's say the Spanish teacher you can't find, so you want to give them an incentive where they only have to work 1 year to become tenure, or however that would be at this point. I'm not against or opposed to incentives. I just feel like it has to be guarded so that it doesn't cause individuals to be selfish, as opposed to working together for the betterment of the entire school. I personally feel like there should be an increase in retention of teachers going from temporary to permanent. And I think in our action plan, it needs to be where the mentoring is mandatory, or I don't know how you would do it, but, or that the leaders pair teams where those with most experience are teamed with those with less experience. I don't know, but that's what I was thinking.
I'm jumping in because the human capital stuff to me will always be so fascinating and so important. And there's so much nuance, like you and Ms. McInturf have both been saying. So I was glad Nathan reminded us that there is also a study on the compensation plans, because it's not something we've talked a lot about as a state in recent years. It was something we talked a lot about during Race to the Top. But, you can imagine, again, if we were able to look and see that, like, maybe what's most effective is that your evaluation scores make you eligible for some of these additional roles that come with additional compensation, whether it's like a teacher leader amongst your department, or it's a mentor teacher for new teachers, which we know often don't get additional compensation for that additional work. Summer school, same thing. I mean, we see teachers signing up for that because it means additional compensation. And, we want our best teachers to be with those kids who really need it. So I agree. I think there's a lot more to study and understand, with the goal being that we retain our effective teachers at higher numbers, and we're also paying them more for the great work that they're doing in ways that, like you said, Ms. Johnson, work for the build towards that collaborative culture that we want and know helps retain teachers. So it's definitely a tricky conversation. And I just remember in the Race to the Top days, the districts that got it the most right brought their teacher groups together. It was something that everybody kind of planned and developed together and felt good about, so that it was, incentivizing the right kind of collective and individual behaviors. But it's certainly complicated. Compensation is wrought with complications when you start talking about changes. So agree. We need to try to understand and study before we would certainly do anything in that space.
Mr. Chairman, as I'm Nathan James on your staff, I'm still thinking about this process and what levers can the board pull. Is it possible to maybe lay it out in a way that encourages districts and superintendents to think about differentiated compensation, incentive pay, these kinds of things in a more collective way, so that, various teams within a school or a whole school, pulls this up or pulls that up, and it would make all of the teachers eligible for it. Because I think that even the statute around differentiated compensation is in itself broad enough to allow different thinking on potential solutions here. But, in looking at its implementation, it seems, at least in my experience, what I've heard, maybe it's been a bit myopic of a focus on, just the specific individual, as opposed to units or groups within a school system. Just a thought.
I love that idea. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, go ahead.
No, I love that idea. I mean, and it would have to be very individualized per school, because every school has a different goal that they would need to achieve. I mean, obviously every school is different, but I mean, if it's focused on growth or focused on, anytime that they show some sort of goal that they've made, that would be great to have some sort of incentive pay for the entire school. So you have even those non-tested teachers able to say that they contributed to that goal. I think that's great.
I think there's opportunities there for folks to simply think about things a little bit more differently, as opposed to, this is what that district did, so ours has got to look exactly like this. Now, think a little bit outside of the box on this. And of course, we as the board staff, you as the board members, think about this process in terms of what can we directly do. And maybe that's an area that we could push some different thinking about it. not to say you can't do it the other way. Obviously, it's very difficult to find a physics teacher, and it's very difficult to find an advanced math teacher. So you wouldn't want to say you can't do that. But on the other hand, if you're interested in getting that collaboration and making sure the whole vehicle's moving in the same direction, that'd be a great way to go after it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a really a good discussion, and tying it into where we are with the master plan. We have the existing 2 goals. Allie, if you could maybe go back a slide, Ms. Reed. Thank you.
I keep moving it on you.
Or 2 slides. Thank you. One on the retaining, I guess, newly licensed teachers for at least 3 years. And then the one regarding permits. I wonder if we should propose a goal that is not outcome based like this, but more process based on things that are within, more directly within our control, on getting a better understanding of what the drivers are for teacher retention and attrition, and engaging in a dialogue with other stakeholders, districts, about like a certain number of proposals for increasing teacher retention and leader retention. Something that kind of folds in this discussion into something that we can then hold ourselves accountable to more directly. Because I'm guessing we all believe, we've seen the member survey results where everybody says we should focus on retaining effective teachers. But then how we get from point A to point B, and just having a goal at point B of we want to see a certain percentage who remain teaching, it may be helpful to have an intermediate goal of, we're going to, as a board, the members and staff, create processes to get a better understanding of what is driving retention and attrition, and propose 3 policies that are within our rulemaking and policymaking authority that we believe would improve retention of quality teachers. Something along those lines. On the 65%, because there were a lot of comments about it, we haven't directly discussed it. I mean, to me, the number felt arbitrary, and it also felt like I think it is the only one of our objective numerical goals where it's a fixed number instead of an increase year over year, which to me it suggests, well, that's like, what if is 65% truly the goal? Like, if we got to 70, are we done? And I think with proficiency in ELA and math, we'd say, of course not. Like, 70 would be great if we had 70% statewide, but then we want to get to 80, we want to get to 100, right? And I assume that's the same thing with transitioning from a permit to a license. I don't know that, but assuming that it is, then I think we'd want to do this, if we want to keep this type of permit to license goal, that we do the same year over year increase, knowing it's a 3-year bundled time period, but still, each 3-year bucket, we would want to see growth by a certain number of percentage points, similar to how we do with other goals.
Mr. Holt, I would just add that in the case of teacher retention, we would, of course, like to see, and permits as well, we'd like to see higher percentages. But in that specific case, a goal of 100% might not be appropriate, because there are cases when teachers are just not a good fit for that school, or not a good fit for the profession as a whole, and need to find a different pathway for their career. And so we certainly want to retain as many as possible who are well fit for the position that they're in and are doing great, but 100% might not be the ideal goal in that case.
Understood. On the first goal, and we should probably move on, but the percentage of newly licensed teachers, do we want to broaden that to just all teachers? Is there a reason why we're focused on newly licensed? as opposed to a teacher who's been teaching for 15 years. I think we want to retain those teachers just as much or more so. I don't know.
Yeah, certainly we were not implying that we don't care about anyone other than our new teachers. I think that there is data that shows that teachers leaving the profession, if they're going to, is most likely to occur within the first 5 years. And so we are tracking towards that as one focus. And then this is also data that we have direct access to through the EdPrep report card. I think not saying that it's not possible to track teacher retention overall, but those are two of the factors that we really considered when we were setting this specific goal.
Got it. Okay. Great. Are there any other comments about the teachers and leaders focus?
Forgive me if somebody pointed this out. For some reason, I haven't been able to reply to the chat, but Mr. Walton shared with us in the slides that the department provided at a workshop in the past. I forget exactly when. That, if my math is correct, it's roughly about 7% of teachers who are on a permit. I'm sorry if somebody already said that, but I was looking at that earlier. Thank you, Mr. Walton, for sharing that with us.
Oh, great. Thank you. I hadn't seen the chat.
And we touched on this too. Sorry, go back. I mean, our whole goal is teachers and leaders, but then we don't have a goal for leaders. So I think that would be where we would talk about training for a more collaborative culture and all the statistics. We talked about that earlier. So just add something or add administration to have a goal towards.
Great point. Thank you. Okay, I'll move us forward to our fourth and final strategic focus area in the current master plan, which is a focus on engagement and accountability. As you all are well aware, the state board is responsible for far more than what we're addressing specifically in the master plan. And it's not to say that that this is what we're limited to doing, but this goal really thinks about those other parts of the work, and specifically focusing on board member engagement with the public, and our priority of transparency and accountability as well. So this one, we did not receive specific feedback from members other than everyone wanted to keep it as written. There were a few comments from staff that I've included in the slide here. One, really thinking about where our upcoming accountability hearings lives. Is that something that we want to set a goal around, or specific action steps within this goal? Setting a goal that's focused on stakeholder engagement specifically, and establishing a goal that's focused on building more awareness of rule and policy work at the district and school level. So open it back up again for discussion. I think another thing to consider here is how we might engage others to commit to this plan, and what are the actions of the board to achieve this. That's also something that could live under here. So additional thoughts, reactions to these points of feedback?
Ms. Reed, could you go back to the goal, please? Just to... I would say that it's great that we all agree that this is important, and that we appear to meet the goal. That's not something that we should take for granted. I mean, I think that speaks to the hard work of the state board staff and members, because this is an important part of what we do. Thinking if there's some way that we could kind of raise the bar on ourselves a little bit here in a way that's measurable.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things that one of the things here that perhaps we haven't thought about is that the TISA review committee is going to be established this next year. And it's structured exactly as the BEP review committee was. And one of the things it does is make recommendations about funding formula changes and differences moving forward. It proved itself extremely effective. The BEP review committee did. It was how teachers got that 9th and 10th month of insurance, and a lot of changes were made. Recommendations from that committee actually worked their way into the creation of the TISA formula. That is a big piece of the accountability side, but also this review of rules and policies is extremely important, because any rule or policy making body is only as effective as it is up to date on what we have on the books and how it's being implemented. So that's I was glad too to see that the members see the value in that.
Thank you, Mr. James.
That's a great point, Mr. James. Just two other things that makes me think of. And again, I'm not sure, this is all exploratory. We're trying to figure out where things live, but other things that will be upcoming that we might want to take note of in this section. Along with the changes to TISA, we have, as we know, these accountability hearings that will start next year for our districts that have F schools repeatedly. A lot of focus there. There's a lot of transparency, accountability wrapped up in that work. And so we may want to think about where that fits. And then the other thing, and again, not sure that it's necessarily something we want to explicitly say here, but to your point, Mr. Holt, about how we raise the bar for ourselves, we're going to be in a transition period as a state. New governor coming in, new commissioner coming in. I see Stephen, Mr. Gentile, thank you for joining us, because they're putting together their strategic plan, something that would speak to maybe just the collaborative kind of partnership that we really need collectively across agencies who are tasked with governing education and workforce. I don't know. I think there's a lot that we could build out here. Much of it is probably hard to measure. And so there may be pushback and we may have to figure out what lives where, but there certainly is a lot happening in this area now and upcoming that we'll want to consider as we're thinking about the goals in this space.
Thank you, Dr. Morris. I see that Dr. Gentile had his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in going to slide forward, you mentioned stakeholders. There's a stakeholders line in there. I think a potential goal could be to annually assess who the stakeholders are and measure what that engagement looks like. I know that's something in our world in higher education. I feel like it's the hardest task is trying to ascertain who exactly are your immediate stakeholders, secondary, and so on. And keeping up that engagement is a feat worth going after.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you. And I would add to this that, Ms. Reed, if you could go back, I know I keep asking to look at the goals itself. On our existing goal on engagement and accountability, the piece of it that we review and update our rules and policies based on changes in law, I think we are very strong on. And we've got a great team, and the General Assembly trusts us with rulemaking authority in new areas of law that come out each year, and we go back and we change other rules based on changes from legislation. And that's very important. We need all of our rules to be tracked to existing legislation and then to respond to the General Assembly's directives to us to create new rules. The aspect of it, the second part here after the OR, opportunities to improve student outcomes. That's an area where I'll confess I feel like I have less of a handle on our processes for, after having good discussions like this and as we have at workshops and meetings, what are the levers where we have power for rulemaking in law already, where there haven't been recent changes, and so they're not kind of areas of focus that we're looking at because there was a new law, but where we have a productive discussion and we think this is important and something where we happen to have rulemaking authority. I know we do a lot of this with teacher licensure, but in other areas as well, where we may have some levers that we can pull and kind kind of how comprehensively are we canvassing what our powers are and kind of mapping that onto the needs that we think we have in the state to achieve the goals that we're sitting here talking about now. So I'm not suggesting we're not doing that, but it's an area where, at least from my perspective, I don't have as good a handle on what our process is to make sure that we're checking off those boxes and feel like we're making changes where we think that they should be made, even if it's not just responding to changes in law.
It's a little more staff magic that occurs in that we have quite a elaborate spreadsheet of all of our rules and policies, and I meet with the policy and research team monthly to discuss it. It's a lot of what dictates our workshop agenda, as well as things that we've called out in the master plan as action items related to our goals. Really sets the tone for what we're reviewing and when. But we are intentionally aligning to this newly required 8-year rule review that the department conducts. And we don't conduct it ourselves. We're doing it in partnership with them because we are administratively tied to the department. But what that does is ensure that all rules are considered over a span of 8 years. And so we align to that process and thinking about what are rules that we are regularly touching because of changes in law or feedback that we're regularly receiving. And you're already aware of ones that are often before the board. And then us thinking about what are the other ones that we don't hear about, that we don't really discuss, and we want to bring forward, and kind of mapping out over a course of a few years when we want to request some presentations, request some conversations to hear how are those rules being implemented, how's it going, for us to then consider, does this need to be tweaked? And so we do have some internal processes and a lengthy spreadsheet that speaks exactly to that.
That's great. I'm not surprised to hear it, but it's good to know. All right, thank you. Are there any other comments or discussion on this strategic focus?
Okay, I can move us forward. Lots of really great ideas that you all have shared for us to take back as a staff and think more about. I did want to also note that the survey that we shared with you all asked for additional education issues that we should consider. And so this list is generated from member feedback specifically. And I think the thing to keep in mind, again, with these as we discuss them, is that while these may be important issues, we again have to consider what is in the state board's locus of control. What do we have rule and policy influence over directly or indirectly? And so this is the list that members submitted, and we will ask a similar question to our broader stakeholder survey, just to make sure that we are covering all of our bases. And is there something that we want to build in to our current strategic focus areas or goals specifically? So on this list, see truancy and attendance, graduation requirements, Algebra 2 alternatives, innovative and successful approaches, potential impacts of AI, parental involvement in rule and policy making, and recruitment and retention of school leadership. Lots of things that we've discussed already today, but I want to open it back up to everyone in case there's one that you added that's on this list that you want to speak to a little bit more, or anything else that we want to discuss in relation to these other education issues to consider.
This is Larry Jensen. I keep raising questions that don't have an answer, so let me raise one more. What's happening with the Department of Education in Washington? How do we track that, check it? It's got to have implications. Don't need an answer, just and that seems to be on our list for consideration and discussion and even understanding as it appears to be coming down in some form. Thoughts on that from any of the folks on the staff? I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, Nathan James here. That's certainly an issue that I think the entire state is got concerns about. The folks in the legislature do, the department, all the local districts. You know, there seems to be a lot that can happen to remove the prerogatives, the staff, and everything else from USDOE. Whether or not they ever reach the magic number of 60 senators to actually repeal the creation statute of DOE. So it's stuck in an interesting place because you have a number of laws that give them responsibilities, and until those laws are changed or passed to repeal them or to move them, there's going to be just this fight and this tension between the branches of the federal government. And I think all the states are watching and just kind of riding the waves, waiting for clearer direction. I know that it's got implications in higher ed. It's got implications just in so many areas. School lunches, you know, everything in between. Maybe the best any of us could do in these different positions is just to be ready to understand that it's not a static environment.
I'll just chime in briefly if it's an appropriate time. On the Algebra 2, I would just encourage a potential broadening of that to be more inclusive of math. I know we talked about numeracy earlier, but we will be starting our math standards review in the spring, summer of 2026. So it's just a year away from now. On Thursday, we'll have a conversation with the folks in North Carolina where they did some really great work over the last few years to increase access to advanced math courses in middle grades. That then presumably would lead to an increase in performance on the more advanced courses in high school, like Algebra 2. So just a thought around a more holistic view of mathematics.
All right, any other discussion on these other issues that folks have raised? All right, Ms. Reed, did you have any other slides for this part of the presentation?
Yes, I'm going to move us into our stakeholder survey question. So as I've been alluding to, we are going to be releasing a broader stakeholder survey, one that has some similar questions to what you completed, members, in your recent survey, but some additional as well. And Dr. Gentile, definitely love your insight here, as I know you all just recently went through this. So any tips or advice, we welcome. And so on the screen here, you see the proposed stakeholder survey questions. If you remember back to our May workshop, when I was presenting along with NASB for the kickoff of this conversation, we were naming different stakeholder groups that we want to share this survey with directly to get their input on these proposed revisions or some additional thoughts that we should consider as we're updating the master plan. And so on the screen is a list of 5 questions. We're keeping in mind what are the types of questions we're asking, how long is the question, how long does it take to complete, how many questions there are. We know that the shorter the survey, the more likely we are to get responses. But these are where we have landed and would love y'all's input here in terms of, do these feel like the right questions to ask our stakeholder groups that we identified at our last board meeting, as well as any tweaks with the ultimate goal of approving that in this meeting today. And then the survey will be sent out the beginning of August and open for the month for our stakeholder groups to complete and respond to, with the group coming back together in September, October to discuss those results. So any feedback on the questions, adjustments, or Dr. Gentile, any words of wisdom here?
I hesitate to say it's wisdom or anything, but we have had a pretty big campaign over the last few months trying to get as much input from as many stakeholders as possible. And I think for me, it's been really eye-opening to see what, say, the Commissioner of Economic Community Development, Stuart McWhorter, his staff have interest in the space. They think about education a lot, of course, labor, and others, but it's just been really good to think outside the box of who might have a stake in education, and how much the work that you guys do is supporting truly the work of so much of the cabinet. And so I welcome participating in this and look forward to seeing what comes of it.
Thanks, Mr. Gentile. And I appreciate that push to reevaluate who our stakeholders are to that end. You know, it's kind of our usual groups, but then there are so many people, to your point, that whose success rests on our ability to be successful in K-12. And so that's a good push. Maybe we can connect offline about some of those folks that you all have incorporated in your review process or your input process.
Yeah, I mean, this plan is the bedrock for Tennessee's success. So there are a lot of people interested in it, I'm sure.
And I know you all have been thinking about this too in your agency. Again, as I mentioned before about the time of transition, because it occurs to me, one thing we've struggled with is to be as aligned as possible with the Department of Education's strategic plan. And given that we're going to be putting this out before there is a new governor, before there is a new commissioner, it gives us an opportunity, I think, to really set that foundation and hope for alignment. And so in some ways, I feel like it's even more important this time around because it has the potential to influence some of what happens in that agency as well, or sister agency.
Any proposed tweaks to the questions?
Ms. Reed, these are the same questions that we asked the members for the most part, right?
They're similar, yes, yes. And of course, what I didn't include on this slide, but we'll ask some additional questions about who is represented in completing the survey. But these are the key questions that we'll ask. I think the biggest difference is questions 2 and 3. Those are not questions that were on the member survey, but specifically thinking about the organization that they're representing and what are our tie-ins to Dr. Gentile's point. How are we connected? Or maybe we'll find out some things we weren't even considering in terms of alignment, or where's areas where we can further align. I will say I did steal some ideas from their survey as well. So thank you, Dr. Gentile, for that, and your team.
Love it.
My only question, I think these are good. My only question is for question 3. Alignment. I wonder if we should broaden it to include, disalignment or any disconnect. So we're inviting that type of response as well.
I like that, or even like the potential alignment. I mean, I think the goal would be that we want to figure out where there's overlap and natural alignment that may not be showing up in the existing plan, but it's a good, yeah, we can look at the wording there, Allie. I agree. Kind of, where there might be any misalignment or potential for better alignment, we can figure out the wording.
I would just it's not really a caution. It's just I would expect that dependent on for Q5 where they're coming from, you might get less nuanced response and some more responses like preparation. And I think that's helpful if that's the overwhelming response. But I think this body right here is going to have more in the weeds feedback on education issues.
Okay, great points. Well, with the exception of some slight tweaks to question 3 in thinking about alignment and disalignment, or potential for alignment, which we will make. I want to ensure that we're generally comfortable with these survey questions. We can take that to a vote, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reed. So let's see, the survey questions, I move to approve the list of survey questions as proposed. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in, or I guess we need to do the roll call. So Ms. Reed, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Ms. McInturf,
Aye.
Mr. Holt,
Aye.
Mr. Jensen, Mr. Jensen.
Aye.
Heard it. Thank you. You have 3 ayes.
Great. So the survey questions have been approved. Thank you, Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed, I believe you have our next steps.
I do. All right, refreshing our memories on the timeline that you saw a glimpse of at our May workshop. Here's where we're at. As I mentioned, this stakeholder feedback survey will be out in the world over the month of August, and then I will send a scheduling poll shortly to get on your calendars an opportunity for us to come back together in either late September or early October to review the feedback that we received and begin working on actually drafting some adjustments to the master plan goals. And then from there, just to remind you that we do have the master plan report, the 2025 master plan report will be before the board at the November board meeting. And then we'll also want to provide the full board with an update on where this committee is at that meeting as well. And then potentially, depending on where we're at in the process, we may need to schedule another work session in December with the plan to have the updated master plan finalized and approved by the board in February at our February board meeting in 2026. Any questions on the timeline? Okay, I do have a few specific next steps for you. First one being, we're looking to have this committee present an update at the August board meeting of just what we were discussing here, just generally sharing feedback from members and staff. And so that will take place just as part of the board meeting report items. But Mr. Chair, if you can plan on presenting on that, and then other members adding in to kind of give a full summary to the board during the board meeting. Also continue gathering informal feedback from stakeholders by talking about the master plan during engagement opportunities. You all are regularly engaged in your communities and your districts, so getting some informal feedback on where we're at and what we're discussing, considering, we really appreciate that, and bringing that back to this committee at our next meeting. Any questions on these next steps or final thoughts for the group?
All right, thank you, Ms. Reed. If there are no other questions, that concludes the work of this committee, and I would be glad to provide an update on this meeting to the board at our August 15th board meeting. And with no further business of this committee, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you to everybody for joining today. Thank you, Dr. Gentile, as well for joining us, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.